Okay, so it's been a while since I've done a film review, so I guess it's about time that I've done one. I've just watched Journey's End. My local cinema, the Empire in Sunderland, has a special feature, Empire Seniors. Technically, it's for older people, but they're not too strict about that. And basically, it's a discount price where they show certain films that had kind of been off from the main run as a one-off. But it's in the morning, and you get free coffee, which is really good, and it's discount. So yeah, if you're in Sunderland, or indeed if you're anywhere near an Empire Cinema, I recommend that. So Journey's End. This is based on a play, a 1928 play by R.C. Sheriff. I was familiar with the title because I done this in my English literature way back in secondary school, going years back now. So I was somewhat familiar with the story. I knew it was set in the trenches, and I'd forgotten the specific storyline, but I knew it explored the dynamic of particularly the psychology that the men face in the trenches. Um, so the film, it's a British film released by Lionsgate, and it premiered in the Toronto Film Festival in September 2017. So I guess it's a 2017 film. The director is Saul Dibb, and it stars Asa Butterfield as Second Lieutenant Raleigh, Sam Claflin as Captain Stanhope, Paul Bettany as Lieutenant Osborne, Tom Sturridge as Second Lieutenant Hibbert, Toby Jones as Private Mason, Stephen Graham as Second Lieutenant Trotter, Robert Glenister as the Colonel. Those are the lead roles. Um, there's a few things I liked about this production. I thought the acting was superb. I thought it was very strong performances from all the cast. If you're not familiar with the story, basically it's about kind of the archetypal young, somewhat naive officer. In this case, the film was mostly from the perspective of the officers as opposed to the men, so to speak. But very much on the front line. And Asa Butterfield plays this young, naive second lieutenant who wants to meet up with a school classmate who's a few years above him, Captain Stanhope, played by Sam Claflin. But being in the trenches has had its impact on Captain Stanhope. He's drinking heavily. By the way, I should say disclaimer. If you haven't seen the film, I'm going to make a few, I guess you could say, storyline giveaways here. So Sam Claflin plays this Captain Stanhope who's drinking. He's clearly psychologically troubled by his experiences in the trenches. He's got a very quick temper. Um, he's seeing things. Paul Bettany plays Lieutenant Osborne, who is, I guess you could say, almost like an older brother or father figure. He's considerate. He's somewhat kindly, and he's at least on the surface more steady. Second Lieutenant Hibbert, played by Tom Sturridge, is he come he there's one scene where Captain Stamp loses his rag because he's reciting stories back from the UK about going out with girls and so on, and it's it's a film that really explores the psychology, the dynamics of living in those sort of close quarters, and I imagine. Well, I was going to say, imagine this is what it must have been really like, but remember, this is based on a play by a man who was actually there. Toby Jones plays Private Mason, who was a cook. Stephen Graham, Second Lieutenant Trotter, who is second in command after Lieutenant Osborne is killed. In terms of suspense, I think the film was very effective. I think it really gave you that feeling of growing suspense because one of the hardest things, from what I've heard, not just in the First World War but in other conflicts as well, is not the fighting itself; it's the waiting around. Um, and that palpable sense of anticipating danger is far more terrifying than actually being in the heat of the moment. So I think the film really captured that well. The only thing I was sort of critical of is the actual battle scenes. I think were a bit, I wouldn't say necessarily disjointed, but I didn't really like the camera work with that. I thought it was a bit, I don't know. I've seen a number of World War I productions. I've just seen the clip from Downton Abbey series 2, episode 5, and I thought they handled the battle scenes better because I felt with this they were the camera angles were too close. It was a bit too chaotic, so you weren't really getting the context of the whole scene. Obviously, you knew what was happening. It was they were going over the front, and in the first action scene, they were trying to get German prisoners. But I felt it was a little bit the camera work, in my opinion, was a bit disjointed and a bit all over the place. I felt the battle scenes could have been done a little bit better. The actual action sequences. However, the rest of the film I thought was very strong. It closes with the sister of young Second Lieutenant Raleigh who dies, receiving a letter from the front. It's very poignant, of course, very sad. And then the closing footnote of the film is the Spring Offensive, that is also known as the Ludendorff Offensive or the German Spring Offensive of 1918, cost 700,000 lives. Um, when we think of the First World War, we tend to think of the Somme and Passchendaele, but actually the engagements of 1918 were just as bloody. The Spring Offensive, the Hundred Days Offensives. Um, 1918, in fact, more Allied troops died than the rest of the war combined. So all the years 1914, 15, 16, 17, more Allied troops died in 1918 alone. Um, it really was a year of intense warfare. And finally, the Allies, of course, made gains. So out of 10, I'd rank this film maybe, I give it a strong 7. I do. I was a bit disappointed by the battle scenes. I think they could have been filmed a little bit better, but the suspense was very well done. The acting was superb, no fault whatsoever in the acting. Um, some very strong performances, particularly in the psychology and the tensions between the men, and the camaraderie as well. I mean, it really, obviously for those of us who have never been in war, we can't say that we know what it's like, but it gives you the impression of what sort of tensions there must have been living in those close quarters, but also how much the men relied on one another. And there was a scene where a guy, forget the character, but he was, he just didn't want to go over the top, and he wanted to be put on medical leave, and Captain Stanhope refused, and really tense scene with that. They kind of squared off within the trench confines, and the lighting is all very effective. I think in terms of building up the trench environment, it was very good. Also, and this might sound like a strange point, but there was character development so far as it was easy to tell the characters apart. I find sometimes with war films, maybe it's bad choreography, maybe it's just a bad script, but sometimes it's difficult to tell characters apart. And because I don't know, with this they were all quite distinctive. They all had their own personality. Um, I find a lot of war films it gets a little confusing because you're working out which character's which, and then you have to keep up with the ranks and so on. With this, it was I thought relatively straightforward. So yeah, out of 10, I give it 7.8. Journey's End. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen it.